All right, everybody. Sorry, guys, we're going to start. And I don't know what number this is for us. I don't know what number. Does anybody know a number? This is like 27th or 28th town halls. All right, and thank you for coming out. This number is okay. I actually prefer smaller numbers. We've had, on average, we're getting about 50 to 60 community participants and residents and social agencies. We've had as high up as almost 100 and as low as 10. But the numbers don't matter. It's not about the number of people here, it's the quality of the people here. And it's the information we get. So the benefit of having a bit of a smaller group is we can have more of an intimate conversation. So my name is Ron Chinzer. I'm a police officer with the Toronto Police Service. My partner is Jason Kondo back there. We have some other partners and some other police officers rolling around. And we're all here for the same reason. And I'll get to the history to how we got here. But before I do that, I'd like to get a better understanding of who you are and really what brought you out here. So if you're comfortable, and you don't have to do it if you don't want to, I'd just be interested to see what brought you out here today. So young lady, would you mind what brought you out today?
My name is Claude.
Scary when it happens close to home. And I think that highlights something bigger, which we'll get into today. So the purpose of today is kind of to get to as most efficiently as we can, is to kind of tell you the ideas going forward for the Toronto Police Service, not just us, but what else we do with a lot of different organizations and partner groups, being faith-based groups, schools, other police officers, youth workers. We've spent 3 years, over 3 years, myself and Jason primarily, and we have some other officers helping us out, figuring out one problem. And this problem started 3 years ago. And where that came from was, there we go, boom. This is Deputy Chief Jim Raymer. All right, and for those of you who aren't familiar with what that actually means title-wise, is I want you to think of Walmart, and Walmart has a president, right? It's a CEO, and underneath the president you have 4 other CEOs. You have a CEO of like sales and marketing, one for toys, one for Bed Bath & Beyond, or one for whatever. Toronto Police Service is the same way. Our president is the chief of police. Underneath there we have 4 vice presidents, and those vice presidents are called deputy chiefs. Well, for us, one of our deputy chiefs is behind me. His name is Jim Raymer, and he's in charge of what's called Specialized Operations Command or Detective Services, which is like all the cool stuff you see in movies. Right, all the undercover officers who go and buy drugs, and they catch bad guys, the people who find guns in gangs, where Jay and I worked, they're all there. And one day, 3 years ago, I believe in December of 2016, Deputy Raymer came down to the gun and gang office and he found Jason. He goes, look, we need to expand our strategy. Every year over the last 15 years, we go out, we arrest hundreds of gang members, we lay thousands of charges, we seize hundreds of guns, we seize millions of dollars worth of drugs, but we can't catch up as quick as they're growing. They're adapting beyond what we can do, so we have to solve this question. And the question is, how do we get a gang member out of a gang? And that became a question for us that we had to sit and think about. So actually, how do we do this? All right, and we've both been police officers for some time. We've dealt with hundreds of gang members in our life. Jay's dealt with thousands of them. We've interviewed them. We got to know them intimately. And we have a better understanding where they're coming from. But when we got tasked with the idea of answering this question, it wasn't as simple as having a solution to it. So with your background as a social worker, education staff, faith-based groups, adults, caregivers, people involved in the security field, what would you do? How would you do this? It's tough, right? Sounds great. Sounds like $1 million idea. Sounds like something I should put on a book cover. All right, that would sell out really quick. How do you get a gang member out of a gang? Boom, people will buy that book. Well, we had the same response. We had a whole bunch of ideas, and what those ideas are conventional wisdom ideas, being ideas that we thought would work based off of what we felt, but if you actually looked at the evidence behind it, we had no evidence behind it. So we started to do a lot of work, and what that work involved was exactly this. We had to look at what the problems are, and as an organization, being the size of the city of Toronto, being the largest municipal police service in Canada, being the 4th largest city in all of North America, being the biggest city in Canada, we had a major problem in our hand when we actually did an assessment of what does the problem actually look like. Because to get a gang member out of a gang, first you need to understand 2 things. What is a gang, and what is a gang member? What are we trying to facilitate and get them out? But in reality, when we did a problem assessment among all of us in their office to say, how are we going to deal with this effectively, we had 3 big questions, and those 3 questions are right there. What is a gang? Where do we go to find gangs? And then who is a gang member? All right, so really basic wise here, and there's no wrong answer, there's no right answer, it's just a thought exercise here. If I were to ask you what is a gang, what would you say? So we had to define something. Yes, sir.
I would say it's
Oh, organization, very good, right? So organization, right, and that's going to be what is a gang, which is right here, what is a gang? So an organization, and this organization, what purpose does this organization have? Criminal activity. What type of criminal activity would this organization have? Drugs. Very good. Ma'am, you're shaking your head in the back. Is there, what do you think?
I think it provides a sense of belonging and a sense of family.
Okay, so it's a gang is a group that provides a sense of belonging and a sense of family. And you said drugs, you said a group of organized people, right? Criminal activity. What else? We're talking about a gang here, right?
There's a hierarchy.
It's a hierarchy, so there's a bit of a structure maybe to it. So with us, when we got into the research and we looked into what is a gang, we wanted to look at empirical evidence, being what are the experts in the field saying, what are the PhDs saying outside of a police perspective and lens. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest things we came across was there is a real problem in the space of gang research. And the problem in the space of gang research comes down to what is a gang, because gangs impact different groups differently. So the way gangs impact police is very different than they impact their neighborhood. It's very different than they impact their schools. It's very different than they impact community centers and local businesses and real estate values. There's so many different ways that gangs impact people that to have one global definition is very difficult to have. And because you can't define something, it becomes very hard to track efficiently for anybody in the academic lens, right? It's very difficult to do it. But we found was all across the board in terms of what we're looking at in terms of a gang, it's these three things. Okay, they deal drugs, they control the territory, and they collect that. And what you mentioned is absolutely true, right? They provide a sense of belonging and a place of safety. But those are reasons why people may join a gang, but they're not the purpose of a gang. Because we can have a group of kids potentially in an environment, 10 kids that provide for each other a sense of belonging, a place of safety, a real sense of community. But unless they have these three, we can't call them a gang. Because if we look at just the reasons, we might be classifying groups of people inappropriately. You might have a gang-impacted neighborhood. Like I'll ask you here, in your neighborhood, if you were to say there's an area where there's a lot of gangs, what's an intersection that you give me? Sorry. See the mumbling? It's okay. Like the idea here, we got to be open and honest, because if we're not going to be open and honest, we're never going to have an answer to this. We're just going to leave here all feeling good that we didn't offend each other. Are you guys okay with that? I'm not okay with it. It's going to get uncomfortable. The point is we need to get over this garbage, this haze of I don't want to make anybody feel bad, because while we're doing this to make each other feel good when we walk out of here, there's people dying. And I'm not okay with that. So I'll ask you again, where's an intersection in your neighborhood that you believe there to be gangs? Lots of places, right? And we'll come back to this because it paints a bigger picture. But realistically for us, and I were to find a whole bunch of kids with the same reasons as somebody who might join a gang, but they're not doing any of these three, I can't call them a gang. They're not a gang. They're a bunch of kids. And what is the problem when you call a group of people hanging out in a gang area a gang? It's not true. And two, for those of us who've been in relationships where your spouse always says you're cheating on them, and you're not, you're loyal as they come, how long do you last before you just do it anyways? Right? So it's a very simplified explanation to say there's real dangers with labeling people, real dangers with it. And the last thing I want to do as a police officer is go into a neighborhood and just say because there's a group of 10 kids, they're gang members because they have these reasons. Because if I come back and I tell all the other officers these guys are gang members, guess what they are? They're gang members. I'm not saying they don't have the activity. So for us, we have to be real clear and objective as to what we're looking for. Now, if these three activities at the core of every gang all over the world, and that group of kids hanging out in that corner are doing this, we know exactly who we're looking for, or we know exactly what we're looking for, which is just this. So the idea of this isn't to say what we're looking for, it's also to say what we shouldn't be looking for. Because if these three are void, we'll not be dealing with a gang. Now, that's not to say that gangs don't do other things. What else do gang members do? What just happened here 2 weeks ago? Murder. What's in the news? Human trafficking, right? Shootings. Obviously you have drug trade. They also do break and enters. They also steal your cars. They also intimidate people. They do harassment. They do victim and witness intimidation. They assault people. They do robbery. They do every crime you could almost think of, gangs are involved in. But historically and all across the board, based off the most latest research, these three or some element of these three need to exist. So perfect, we know what a gang is. And the second part became, well, where do we go in the city of Toronto? So number one, okay, we knew who we're going to look for when it came out to getting a gang member out of a gang. We know what activities we got to look at. And the second part is, where do we go in the city of Toronto? And we do this exercise, which we don't really need to do today because we kind of already got through it. But the idea is, generally speaking, when we go out to these events, and I ask people and I say, where do we go? And we work as a team to figure this out. For the entire city of Toronto, out of our 28 town halls, or 27, I don't even know what number this is, I'm kind of lost. Out of the 26, 27 town halls, we've been given the same intersection in about 22 or 23 of them. Can you guess what intersection that is for the entire city of Toronto? When I said we have to go find a gang member right now, where do we go? So that's popped up. Does not matter the demographic of who I'm talking to. That has nothing to do with anything. When I talk about gangs and I say we need to go right now in the next 5 minutes to find a gang member, 23 out of the 26 or 27 town halls, people have said, all right, to be smart. It made me laugh. He's a funny guy. But we know, okay, it's not that simple. So what I'll show you is this. We came across this map. Has anybody seen this map before? I know it's tough to see because it's small. I made it as big as I could. This is the city of Toronto. It's the entire city of Toronto. And if you notice, the city of Toronto is broken up into 140 neighborhoods. Are you guys familiar with it? Your neighborhood is called Woburn. We did not designate that. We did not divide your city. The city of Toronto did it in 2015. And how they divvied up the city was they based it on what's called an equitable score. And the equitable score was based on a whole bunch of things, but I'll give you some of them that I can remember right now. One of it had to do with what does your home look like in terms of how many parents are there? What does your average median income look like in terms of how much money does your family actually make? What do you feel like your voice is in the development of your community? What is your access to economic opportunity? What is your access to transportation to economic opportunity? And a whole bunch of other things. And what they did is they divvied up the city into 140 different neighborhoods. And if you notice, there's 31 neighborhoods that have an orange or a mustard color attached to them. And those neighborhoods are called the 31 neighborhood improvement areas, also known as the lowest equitable score neighborhoods in the city. Now what we did is we found this map, and on our own we ended up taking a look at some police data in terms of where are the gangs? Where do the gangs live? Where do they commit their crimes? Where has been the history of gangs? And if I were to take our police intelligence and combine it with this map, it's almost the exact same. Not a surprise, right? There is a direct correlation to social disorganization as well as gang membership and criminality. And what that means in a weird way is it's a theory from the 1940s which has been studied throughout all the way up to 2020, and what it kind of translates into is saying that sometimes your environment matters more than the individual person when it comes down to criminal behavior. And if you look at these areas, the way they're designed, if you look again, the lack of access to opportunity and outcomes, it starts to become crazy. Like I'll ask you, for example, I don't know the East End, I'm a West End guy. All right, but I'm in Rexdale, and I know Rexdale and that whole side of the world really well. And the best example I give to people there is, to summarize social disorganization, is I don't know this area, but around here, how many of them are there? Sorry? No. Is some fancy people like, some of us can't afford it, but right? And that's why it's not here. So I'm going to paint a picture for you with this. And this is not a knock on, because believe it or not, they actually came to our last town hall, and we had a manager show up and said, listen, I'm here to give people a job. And I don't know how that happened, but she ended up coming out, and she was great. But here's the reason why. So we have kids in this audience today, or participatory group. How old are you, little guy? 9. And how old are you? You're not a little kid, sorry. I just got, ma'am, how old are you? 7. And what do you want to do when you get older? What's your dream job? You don't know? What about you? No idea? Well, okay, give me, if there was a genie right now and that genie came out and said, I'm going to give you one wish and you can have whatever you want to do in the world, what would you be? You don't know. A zookeeper. That's really cool. All right, the reason I bring that up is, look, we got kids here, and in some places when I go to, in some of the really hard-hit areas, and I have kids and we talk to them and say, what do you want to do? You know, they give you very pure things, very awesome things, cool things. But the reason I bring up is, if we have a neighborhood like this, and you guys are actually in a knock on wood with the horrific thing that happened, you guys are in a pretty good spot, right, compared to some of the other neighborhoods we're in. I'm not saying you don't need help. What I'm saying is, you guys are doing all right compared to some of the other neighborhoods. Now, if we have small kids like this and you tell your kids you can do anything you want in the world, you could be a doctor, an astronaut, a lawyer, an engineer, a physicist, anything you want in the world, yet when they look out the window, they can't see something. What is the reality to that dream for a lot of people? It's just a dream. The reason I bring that up is because it's a common thing. We all drink coffee every day. Most of us drink coffee every day if you're stressed out or if you have kids. Keeps you awake. It's a global organization. They pay for post-secondary education. They have a great employment stream internally, and you can grow yourself in that organization. Yet we have one in this neighborhood. So if you're telling your kids, young ones that are likely to become gang members or get involved in that system, you can do whatever you want, but they don't see it. Well, what's the likelihood of them pursuing it? It's very, very difficult. It's a foreign territory. It's almost like an alien planet. And I can tell you in our experience, when we deal with gang members, the worst of the worst gang members, they haven't been within 5 kilometers of where they live. They don't know what the other street looks like. They stay in this little pocket. So to them, what's in that 5 kilometers is their world. So when we talk about realistic expectations, well, there's almost an obligation to say, all right, man, let's make it happen in a different way. So with this, we said, all right, low equitable neighborhoods, if you look at all of them, I don't know the rest of the places, but massive geographic area, 2 Starbucks. For me, that's kind of a simple way to look at what is the impact. So we know, number 1, what is a gang? We know, number 2, where do we need to go in the city of Toronto? And kind of what brought us out here was exactly that. We want to engage the 31 most impacted neighborhoods, say what's happening from the inside out. And I'll get to where that came from. And the second part became, well, who joins a gang? That picture there is from an investigation I did 6 years ago. This is a child of a gang leader. This picture was taken from his cell phone. He was arrested with 3 guns, a kilo of cocaine, $20,000 cash, and he was arrested with 7 other gang members. All right, he's now in prison. He's in prison for 12 years because it was his 3rd gun offense. He was 24 years old when we arrested him. 3 guns. And when we got this picture from his cell phone, I blacked out the kid's face. I took away the gang logo, but you can see they're holding stacks of money. What I'm not showing you is the picture of this kid holding the same extended magazine Glock handgun that he was caught and arrested with. So when we talk about who joins gangs, the reason why I show such a young child being at the age of probably 5 or 6 is because to think that's not happening is untrue. It's happening. It's happening here in the city. And when it comes down to the urgency to focus on what is the solution here, there's no better picture than this to say, look, it's here. I did not want to show the one with the gun. 1, I couldn't find it, and 2, I think it might be too intense for a lot of people to see a small child like that with a gun. And look, does this child look like they're afraid? Do they look like they need a place to belong? Do they look malnourished? Do they look like they have some severe psychological issues right now? For any of the administrative staff or educators who say this might be a difficult child, and we don't know. And again, we got this from the cell phone of the gang leader that we actually arrested. So I'll ask you here, who joins a gang? Describe to me somebody who joins a gang. And now we might be talking about reasons and stuff, right? So it's tough. It's very tough. And educators, among all of you here, you probably dealt with thousands of students. And out of those thousands, maybe, how many would you say, I'll use you guys as a benchmark here, and girls, out of your, let's say, average 1,000 students at school. Is that a fair number? 1,000 students? Yeah, roughly. What do we, 250, so smaller schools, smaller. So let's go percentage-wise, roughly, and this is not to say 100% definitive, this is nothing to say, roughly percentage-wise, what percent of your school population would you believe to be either gang involved or at risk of becoming gang involved? Difficult.
For my school, it would be about 75%.
75%. And what makes you say that?
Because the schools I work with are, especially made or created to deal with students who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And in our communities, they're not your typical high school. Were created for meeting the needs of students who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
In their community, at school, in their home. So I would have a very high percentage.
Yeah. And the crazy part is, and I'll ask you, you're going to have better insight than I will, are there commonalities among all of them?
Yes.
There are. What would you say some of those commonalities would be in your experience and in your opinion?
They don't believe they have a choice.
Yeah.
They really think that this is really the only option for them.
Yeah. They only outlook of life, right? So astronaut, lawyer, military, whatever you want. This is who I am, right? And that becomes a very defining statement when we say this is who I am. Very defining, almost damning experience or statement if it's very destructive on its onset, and if the belief system ties into it at a very young age, right? And we're seeing that. And the reason why I bring up the commonalities is because while this problem is one that you have to look at in depth, not in width, the more in depth we get to it, we're having a conversation earlier, and I said, look, the real strategy to this and how we actually solve it after almost 3.5 years of learning about this and really embedding ourselves in different environments and dealing with gang members, their families, finding all the different stakeholders to say what's happening on your end. The real thing is the divisiveness is not what's common, it's the commonalities that are common, right? This is just a human issue. It's not a gang issue. This is a poor human. If I were to take away the word gang for all those kids and that you're dealing with, and I were to just to say, look, we're gonna mark the milestones in this kid's life from 0 all the way to 18. And I'm gonna point out all the things to you, which we're gonna do. I'm gonna point out all the areas where this person might have needed a little bit of a boost, maybe a protective factor to mitigate some risk here. I'm pretty sure if I were to remove the word gang, we'd have unending support worldwide. Because they would say no human being should have to go through potentially what this person went through. But because we attach a word gang, what happens to it? Divide. It's scary, right? Oh man, it's a gang member. I can't talk to them. It's not safe. We're not going to go there. Sometimes I'll go into businesses and we do a lot of advocacy work in Alaska, a room full of people in a really good environment. I say, well, who's impacted by gangs? Right, so I'll ask you here, who's impacted by gangs or has felt like they've been impacted by gangs? What I mean by impacted is you got to change kind of your day a little bit, or you've had dealings with a gang member. Right? Most of us in the room, for the most part. I'll go into a business and I'll do the same thing and they'll say, nobody will put their hand up. And then my follow-up is, well, who avoids certain parts of the city of Toronto because they're afraid of gang violence? And everybody's hand goes up. And the purpose of that is to get everybody on a collective vision. Right? So when we talk about who joins a gang, with us, we couldn't just point in a random intersection and say every kid that looks like X, Y, and Z is a gang member. It's not the truth. We know it's not the truth. We know the statistics say it's not the truth, but we need an objective lens. So we know what a gang member is objectively. We know where to go objectively. The third one to become, who do we target? Who do we target to get out? And what you have in front of you is you have that little laminated card. It's called gang risk factors. And those gang risk factors, this was provided from Public Safety Canada. It's a 2007 publication that has been cited in almost every publication going forward. And what they did is they looked at gang members from all over the world and they said, what are the commonalities in gang members? And they broke them down into 5 categories, and there's 36 individual risk factors that all occur between the age of 0 all the way up until the age of 18 plus. And the more of these you can check off, the more likely the person is to become gang involved or at least a criminal. And if you take a look on those risk factor cards, they're objective, they're done by academics in the field, PhDs and experts that have conducted massive studies and cross-corroborated information. And what they said is, look, the more of these you check off, the more likely they are to become a gang member. Now I'll ask you to take a look in there. Does anything in there mention gender, race, skin color, religion, ethnicity, belief? None of it. None of it does. And the reason why we bring that up and highlight it is to say, look, you cannot look at one particular race or group and sex and say, this is a person who's going to become a gang member. We can't do that. Because what happens? 1, you're unfairly targeting a group, and 2, you're missing a whole demographic and population group that's going through the same issues that nobody's giving attention to. You're missing that. We can't miss it. We don't have the time to miss these things. We have to capture everything in essence as a whole. And what I'll do is those risk factors you have in front of you, they don't all happen at the same time, but they happen cumulatively and they grow exponentially. All right, so for the first couple of years of this strategy, we get asked all the time, what does the program look like? How are you going to get a gang member out of gang? And we tried. We tried with approximately 70 gang members, and we had success with 1. And the one that we did have success with was a 12-year-old. All right, and that, he would have been okay on his own. He would have figured it out. But with us, we had 60-something failed attempts, and some of those interactions were one conversation. Majority of them were one conversation. One conversation, and they were really motivated, and then they peeled out. And we never heard from them again. They wanted nothing to do with us. But the conversation was based around, do you want help? And in every one of those, they all said yes. So I'll ask you here, what happened in that time frame? We talked to them. They're motivated to want to get out. I said, yeah, I want to get sorry, I want to get out. And then poof, we don't hear anything back. What's your thoughts? And what happens to that person? I'll tell you what happens to that person. They go back to everyday life. They go back to the other 23 hours of the day when they're not surrounded by somebody focused on this particular task of saying, we're going to get you out of this lifestyle. So when we look at the expectations we have from some of these students, some of these people who might attend your church, or some of the people in your neighborhood, or people you work with, the best way to put it into perspective is, look, these guys are creatures, guys and girls, are creatures of habit. And they are products of the risk factors that are left unaddressed and unmitigated. And for those of us, by raise of hand, who drinks coffee every day? Every day, coffee every day, right? Now, if I were to ask you, as adults, as professionals, as educated people here committed for a cause in our city, don't have a coffee tomorrow, how fun would you be to deal with? I said, don't have a coffee tomorrow, and then come in and let's have a conversation. How would your day be? A little off? Bad, right? Look, you're smiling. So what would tell me an example of what a bad day would be like. Like, how would you react?
Everything would be stressful.
Everything would be stressful. Anybody else feel those sentiments? If I don't have my morning coffee, my morning ritual. So think about it. You don't have a coffee, your day's screwed up. What is the expectation from somebody who from the age of 0 all the way to 18 has been living the same day every day, and we ask them to change their behavior and expect dramatic results overnight? This strategy is not one where we're going to get a result in 6 months or a year. This is going to be a 10, 15, 20-year strategy. We got to wait the generation out. We need to start putting some seeds into people's heads, but collectively nourish those seeds for the same goal and the same vision, being not to arrest gang members particularly, but to not have them become gang members in the first place by identifying these risk factors. So the 5 categories are family, school, peer group, individual, and your community. Now, if you look at the family risk factor category, I'm going to give you the big takeaways for this in terms of what to watch out for. In the family risk factor categories, the biggest one to watch out for is a 3-year-old child who is uncontrollable. Right? So all those risk factors, the biggest thing that anybody's going to see is a 3-year-old child that's uncontrollable. I'm talking about that kid who does not listen to anything, who bites people, punches things, kicks things. I'm not talking about the one who spends an extra little too much time on the tablet or won't get off of the toilet. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the one who is a terror to deal with. Right? That's the biggest thing to look out for. Now, that's not to say that the 3-year-old who's like that is a gang member at all. What's to say is that's unhealthy. Right? That is to say is that research says that the likelihood of this person growing to be a successful and productive adult is starting to slim. We're starting to narrow it, and that can't be tolerated. Right? So you have a 3-year-old uncontrollable, and then that 3-year-old becomes 6 years old and gets into the school risk factor categories.
We had one like that in our church. A kid, the mother said to somebody else that questioned her, he's 8 years old. She said, he can do whatever he does. Yeah, well, we see it in church.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah. So that same 8-year-old that you were just talking about.
Can't wait until he's 15.
So, and why do you say that?
Because we know what he's going to be like.
What's he going to be like?
He's going to be a gang.
He's going to be a gang member.
Violent.
Violent and horrible. So this is the crazy part, and this is the whole point of this. You already know where he's going to go. We already know. She has already put them. This kid, when he's 15, he's going to be arrested. And then when he gets arrested, what are you going to say? Not surprised. Yeah, nobody did anything. Right? And I think that's the overwhelming theme is nobody did anything. Nobody did anything. So that 15-year-old might be the kid who killed another kid 2 weeks ago. And nobody did anything. We're just going to watch this happen. Does that make any sense to anybody? Like what I just said, we're just going to watch this happen, and then when it happens, say, oh man, somebody should have done something about this? That's crazy to me. That's so foreign. I just don't understand that. And here's the point, that 3-year-old, right? Uncontrollable. Becomes 6, gets into school. And now we're seeing that same 3-year-old get into school at the age of 6, and the biggest indicator at 6 being grade 1 is school failure. Right, and any of the academic teachers here ever teach grade 1? It's grade 1. Did you ever have kids who failed or were not successful? And what was that like?
It's hard to say, I mean, I'm so young.
It's frustrating.
Hope that yes, time with more support, that things will improve. That's so amazing in a child's life to be saying.
Here's the marker, but it happens. They're here. Sir, what about you?
Well, that was me. I failed big one.
And look at you today, disgusting. I'm just joking.
It's devastating. Well, now in many schools, child maybe belongs with their age appropriate peers, but I'm very ancient, so at that time, failing a grade or two was not unheard of. And it's very demoralizing. Again, as I said earlier, it limits your perspective of what you see for your future.
Yeah.
Even at an early age, that idea begins to be ingrained in your mind. There's very few choices.
So grade 1 who fails grade 1. So a grade 1 who fails grade 1, right? They don't fail, but they're not successful, right? So we're talking about success and passing, which is two different things. So they may get passed through, but that grade 1 kid, or that kid in grade 1 who fails, not all the cases, but are they also uncontrollable? 3 years old, uncontrollable. Grade 1 failure. The uncontrollable comes with the failure. All right, that's why they fail.
I just want to say I'm a retired educator too, and I have many friends who are teachers and ECEs, and uncontrollable children in the kindergarten who go on a rampage in the classroom, and the teacher takes the other kids outside while that kid finishes the rampage. I cannot believe this is happening. I'm retired 25 years.
Yeah.
I cannot believe what I see.
Yep. So we see that, right? 3 uncontrollable. Grade 1 starts filling in the school risk factor category. And if you look at school risk factors, they start to go a real detachment from the academic environment. All right? But really, when they get detached from it, it's very hard. I have nothing but respect for teachers. Teachers were like heroes to me growing up. And I still remember what helped mitigate a lot of my risk factors was 3 teachers in particular that planted seeds in me in one-off conversations that I still value to today. All right, but this kid gets kind of isolated, right? Because you got like 25, 26 other kids to deal with, right? And really, how much resources can we dump into the one? Those issues are outside of the academic environment, right? You still got to focus on the other, so this kid gets kind of pulled away, all right? And really doesn't develop relationship skills or a pro-social attitude is what it's called. So then 3 uncontrollable, 6 failing school, and then we move on to the peer group category, all right? And in this case here, 3 years old, uncontrollable, grade 1 fails. He's 9 years old, and 9-year-old, you get to play outside by yourself? Yeah, me too, right? When I was 9, I used to go play by yourself. My son is 9 years old, and he can't go anywhere without me because I'm super paranoid, all right? Because that's me. But when I was your age, I was out and about, and the rule for me was I got to be home before the streetlights come on. So I could come home after school, put all my school stuff away, do my chores quickly. I'm out that door, man. We're going to play street hockey, basketball, get up to no good, whatever. It doesn't matter. Right, but we would go and do all that stuff. Well, the same thing happens to this kid. But when he's 9 and he's out, he hasn't developed any pro-social skills. He has behavior issues that have stemmed from a really not a productive household environment. And now he's out in the wild, and he's 9 years old. And when he's out in the wild, does he find more people like him or less like him? Less. So if you're out by yourself playing, do you find friends that kind of like the same things you like, or do you find friends that don't like the same things you like? Like, what do you play for fun? What do you do for fun? Video game. What video games do you play? Which one, Valhalla? So let's say you go outside and you're playing by yourself and you find another kid, and one kid says, I like Valhalla, and the other kid says, I hate video games. Which one are you going to be friends with? Yeah, 100%. The one like you. So now this kid goes out in the wild and he finds another kid who's uncontrollable at 3, fails school at grade 1, has no attachment to pro-social peers, and then all of a sudden this kid finds like a group, right? Oh, these are my people. And what happens here collectively when you have a 9-year-old who goes to school, pushes another 9-year-old, takes their lunch money, and says, if you tell anybody, I'm going to beat you up. What do we call that? Bullying, right? So here's the biggest indicator for you right now. We call it bullying, but the actual terminology is delinquency. All right, and what delinquency translates is that same behavior, pushing somebody, taking their money, telling them, if you tell anybody, I'm going to hurt you. Once you get over the age of 12 in Canada, that's called robbery. So it's called robbery. All right, what delinquency is this child practicing what's going to happen in adulthood. They're practicing criminal acts. They're doing it in front of us, but we water it down with words like bullying. Right? And then sometimes we all say, oh, it's boys being boys or girls being girls, or they shouldn't have done this in the first place. That's besides the point. The point is they're showing us what they're going to do. They're forecasting it for you, just like you said, when this kid turns 15, he's going to end up in jail. They're showing it to us. All right, and then all of a sudden, this kid from 9 to 15, we hit the individual category, and at the age of 15, I've spoken to many police officers, I've spoken to many social workers, youth workers, probation officers, bail and correction officers, and at the age of 15, the biggest indicator is they'll tell you if you ask them. Ask them, are you a gang member? Now, they might not tell you if you're family. They might not tell you if they look at you as a potential person in authority, and I mean in terms of care, so they might not openly tell teachers because there's a different relationship there, but they'll tell us as the police, which is crazy. You'd think that these guys would not tell you. They tell us. And if you don't know and if you're curious if this 15-year-old is a gang member, just look at their social media. Look at their Instagram, their Twitter, their Facebook, whatever they're on. Just take a look. They're blasting it in front of you. It's impossible to miss. So the biggest indicator at the age of 15 is self-admission. They'll tell you if you ask them if you have a relationship. Are you a gang member? I mean, if they're going to tell a cop, they're going to tell anybody. And they tell us all the time. When we have them isolated in a 10 by 10 room and we're interviewing them after they've done some violent things and we ask them, are you a gang member? They'll say yes in that moment, but it's different when it goes to court. Okay, and the reason why it's different when it goes to court is sentencing changes. Things become heightened when you have a gang member. So they'll deny, but in a private conversation with us, they'll tell you, yeah, man, I am a gang member, or it's on their social media. All right, so 3 years old, uncontrollable, 6 years old, failing school, 9 years old, practicing delinquency with friends, being criminal acts, 15 years old, and we have that gap between 9 and 15. Gap between 9 and 15. 9 and 15, there's self-admission. And then what happens is it all translates into the community risk factor category, which is a part for us when we had a bit of a aha moment. And that aha moment as police officers are, when I looked at all the other risk factors and we talked about it in our offices and we actually spent some time doing thought to this, we realized we're not trained for any of this. Okay, you do not call the police for a 3-year-old who's uncontrollable. You don't send the guys with guns. Okay, the kid who's failing school, you don't call the police for that. A 9-year-old who's bullying another kid, practicing criminal acts, potentially, but we don't have the answer to that. All right, then you have 15, you have a self-identified gang member, all right, which is a deeper social, psychological issue, which is stemming from something that no police officer that I know, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, have an independent education, is qualified to be able to properly diagnose or assess or to foster some solutions to. But where we come into play is 18, which is exactly where we're at now. All right, and what 18 happens is, if you look at the risk factors in 18, it's serious community violence. Serious community violence, which is where we're at now. All right, so I'll ask you here just to think about this. When did shootings become a problem in the city of Toronto? Just think about it. When did you notice the urgency on something to be done? We had a federal election not too long ago, last year, and one of the questions that every federal leader was asked, you're talking about the future leaders of this country, what are you going to do about the gun and gang violence? Everyone was asked, right? And they all came up with some answers, which, whatever, man, give your answer, it's all good, all right? They give an answer to it, but they were asked about the gun and gang violence. And I'll ask you, what happened in the last 3 years for gun and gang violence to grow so much in this country that future leaders at the federal level for the country were asked, what are you going to do about this? It's a tough question, right? Nobody really knows. I'll ask you, I'll summarize this and you tell me if you agree or not. It became a problem in the city of Toronto when shootings happened in places where they weren't supposed to happen. Yes or no? Is that true? Then it became like everybody's like, whoa, wait a minute, it's not supposed to happen here. It's not supposed to happen at this time, it's not supposed to happen here. I just think about that sentence I just told you. It became a problem when shootings happened in places they weren't supposed to happen.
The Eaton Center one, I think, was the one that really brought it to life.
Yeah. But if you look at the sentence I brought to you, where are they supposed to happen? Nowhere. That's the point. So when we talk about tolerance and what do we do going forward, all of us collectively have to raise our tolerance and standards here to say, wait a minute, man, this cannot be accepted at any level. Right? We just can't accept it, whether it's in a church, a school, police, or community, or youth workers. If we're seeing this happening, as this young lady said with this gentleman in her church, if we're seeing this happening and we let it go, this is never going to end. By the time they've got to 15 plus and it's serious community violence, it's too late to come in there and save somebody's life. The likelihood of that happening, I'm not saying it's impossible. What I'm saying is the likelihood of it happening is slim to none. But you're going to have much better results focusing on younger age groups that we can identify earlier on to find these risk factors. So what do you do with the risk factors? Right? And the risk factors, what you do is you mitigate them. So with us, we spent quite some time trying to figure out how we do this. And what we did is we did a whole bunch of things in the last 3 years. All right, which is, just to summarize, we conducted intensive research all over the world. We looked in Canada, United States, South America, United Kingdom, and Europe. I want to see, does anybody have a way to get a gang member out of a gang? Nobody has a way. We did consultations with every impacted group you could think of. That kid, that story I just told you, how many groups and agencies and organizations does that kid have experiences with prior to getting to serious community violence? Let's name them. They grow up in their family, right? So families are impacted. Unfortunately for us, and what we're seeing is the majority of the gang members that we deal with that want to get out of a gang all live in community housing. So you have community housing. All right, what else do you have? You have lack of employment opportunity, so you have local businesses that are impacted. You have local real estate that's impacted. You have, think about it, if there's a shooting in a neighborhood and you have small mom and pop shops, which is the majority of these low equity neighborhoods, or small mom and pop shops, who's gonna come there to eat anything? Nobody from the outside comes, it's all local people, so the businesses don't grow, so they're impacted. Then we move on, that kid becomes 9, goes out in their neighborhood, they impact neighborhoods, they impact city staff, they impact parks and rec, they impact community centers, and then you look from 9 to 15 when we start to see the youth violence start to happen, the crimes like robbery, break and enter, car theft. Now they've got incorporated with the police, the legal systems, courts, prosecutions, legal aid. You have all these different groups, and they become 18 and they go out. And we look at it, we found about 30 different organizations. And we consulted with all of them over the last 3.5 years to say, what is the needs on your end? What are you seeing that we're not seeing? We know our lens really well, but we don't know your lens. So we had to spend some time doing needs assessment. We also wrote 7 grants to help fund some of these initiatives through partnerships. One of those being that we wanted to do what's called a gap analysis. We wanted to see what is the disconnect between social services and youth who need them. We have it available. It's on our website at torontogangprevention.ca. It was published in August of 2018. It's gone to the federal government. It'll be published nationwide. And what we found was a few things. There's about 15 different highlights, but one of the biggest indicators was we know off of stats about 90% of gang members in Canada are male, about 90%. And that's just what we know. It's not to say that there's not a higher female population, it's just we don't know 100% of the stats. If you're a male over the age of 18 in Toronto and you're getting out of jail, there's nothing for you. You're on your own. And that was as a result of our gap analysis that we conducted in the city. You're stuck, right? And that draws a bigger picture. Outside of the grants, we did a lot of engagement, which is stuff like this. We spoke to many organizations, many different people. We spoke to thousands of people to gather better insight and to pitch the idea. We ran pilot projects, we did assessments, advocacy work, and then these town halls. And I'll tell you where these town halls came from. We spent 2 years trying to merge government to government operations, all right? But the reality is, there's a few realities to it. Number one is, when we'd hooked up with all these different agencies to come collectively together, to say, let's work on this together, let's find where each of us sit, let's work together to solve this, we had a provincial election. And it shut everything down because no government agency knew where funding was gonna come into play. So we lost a year to that, a year and a half to that. Nobody wanted to engage in new partnerships because they didn't know if there's going to be properly funded to do the right job. And then after that, we had a city election for the mayor, everything shut down again. And in that process, we had a lot of time to sit and think and go through some trial periods. And what we realized was, hey man, nobody's ever engaged the actual communities that are most impacted. Right? So for this, we did this with the intent of having you people show up. This wasn't to have gang members show up. No gang member is going to see an Instagram ad or a flyer and say, well, I'm gonna come out to see what, we're not stupid, we knew that. We wanted people who are influenced in their neighborhoods. The reality is, as police officers, we're not trusted. I get it, right? Nobody calls the police because they have extra cake at home. It doesn't work that way. They call us when it's really bad things, or you get a speeding ticket. I got it, not a big deal. But you have more influence in your neighborhoods than we're ever going to have. Within the church, within your schools, wherever else, you have those insights. We don't need to build those. If you already have it, how can we work together to drive the strategies and the support from the inside? How can we find people who invest in on the inside? Right, it's kind of for that. These town halls, again, they're very insightful for us. At the end of this, we'll have question and answer. And if you have any insights, any inputs based on what you tell us, please let us know. It does not fall on deaf ears. We pass this up to the, within the city, within the province, and now within the federal government. The federal government has asked us to act as advisors in terms of the national strategy, and everything that gets said here in terms of where are the gaps, where are the opportunities, we include in a year-end report or a report after these town halls to shoot it up the pipeline to say, hey, this is what we've heard, and we've heard some tremendous things that we never knew about that are kind of caught in the intricacies. The strategy in itself, as much as we're talking about gang prevention, and the reason I bring this up like a Rubik's Cube is this is the best way I can explain it to people that make sense of a really complicated thing, all right? I want you to imagine a Rubik's Cube. Everybody knows what a Rubik's Cube is? Yeah. Right, so it's mixed up and you gotta make it work together. So What we found is, we found a model in the United States that we expanded on and shrunk and did a whole bunch of things to that's gonna work here. And that model in the United States is, look, if you really wanna combat this problem, there's two things you gotta look at. Number one, you gotta look at gang membership. That's a whole issue in itself. What's happening to kids to wanna drive into this lifestyle? The second part is, what do you do about gang violence? So we're looking at two different things. Gang recruitment and membership, and then gang violence. They're two different things. All right, gang violence, the number one way to combat that all over the world is the police. You arrest the people doing the gang violence. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's a portion of the population, and this is not anecdotal, this is evidence-based, of the gang population that's just not fixable. They're not fixable unless they're in what they call 3 meals in a bed, being in prison, being in a structured environment where you can conduct a proper needs assessment. The other 90% have an average gang membership of 2 to 3 years. And in all the cases, almost all of them, they leave the gang for their own reasons. All right, they're in it, it's like between the age of 15 to 19. Generally they get out because they found a girlfriend or a boyfriend, they've been a victim of a crime, somebody they know died, they moved, they went to university, and they all leave. They all leave, but the other 10% is responsible for 100% of the criminal decision making. So for us, we gotta focus on the 10%. Well, the global strategy for this gang prevention, and prevention is the word because everybody wants to invest in prevention, is this. I'll ask you here, before we get to there, but we have 4 big pillars, all right? Education, prevention, intervention, and suppression. This gang prevention strategy needs all 4 of those. The education component is the one that's the most important for us right now. It's learning from everybody, unlearning, and then relearning again, because it's constantly being adaptable, looking at the research, staying objective, gathering needs from everybody, being from the community, and then sharing what we have and then relearning from everybody else. The second part being prevention, all right? Prevention is stopping kids from getting in gangs in the first place. Intervention is, what do we do about all the kids that are already in gangs right now? They can't be negated, they can't be left alone because they're coming out re-recruiting and they're re-offending at a higher rate. And there's gotta be something for them afterwards. And the last one is suppression, being exactly where the police lay. For us, the police is like, we gotta go out and arrest the bad guys. The other spaces, we're probably not the best for it. Right? I know for a fact we are not the best for it. The prevention end, you don't need a police officer there. What you need is a skilled social worker, a youth outreach worker, somebody with a mental health background, somebody who can understand how to communicate effectively, be able to see what they're looking at, clear. With us, we got a very focused lens. It might not be the best for that. With all that being said and done, those 4 pillars come in at different times. Education stays all the way through. This is what works best when and where. Okay, between 0 to 9 in these risk factor categories is when prevention works. That's evidence-based. They looked at all the prevention strategies in the world and we said, what works when and where? Like what has some measurable results when you look at it to say, we're gonna do a prevention initiative, we wanna have real outcomes onto there. They all work between 0 to 9. That's the most effective time to prop in prevention initiatives. After prevention comes intervention, what do? Now it becomes 9 to 18. Where that intervention is that's the ones where we get them into the criminal justice system, they start doing violent crime, they start showing themselves. They're that 15-year-old that becomes a gang member. Intervention strategies work the absolute best between 9 to 18. All right, but they have to be done in conjunction with prevention ones. And then the very end is this, suppression, being 15 and up. 15 and up, it's the police. However, we can't do this without including the prevention and intervention piece. We just can't. It's not an effective way to do it because they're coming back out. They're re-recruiting other kids. They're victimizing more people. They are committing violent acts in the neighborhood, and we can't just put them in jail and let them go out. There has to be something else involved, being the prevention and intervention piece. Look, it's all about opportunity recognition, right? And saying, okay, where are the opportunities, not where are the doors being shut? And if you just shift that perspective and look at everything as an opportunity, every bad thing's got to flip to it. That's opposites have to exist in the same universe. Can we capitalize on it? Can we work together? Can we move fluidly? Like even after today, what the thoughts are already going are, look, how can we set up a not-for-profit? How can we do this? How can we subsidize costs? Because if you're saying there's the volunteer base to support it, we need to see that, right? Because unfortunately, a lot of people say, man, we're here. It's ghosts. It just floats in the air. But I got belief, right? There's some. We don't need 100. We need like 3. We're good. We can start small, expand. With this, in closing, I guess, I mean, we can have some private conversations if you guys want to have private conversations. But in closing, this isn't the end for us. This is the beginning. We have your email addresses for a reason. We'll be conducting some follow-up, some outreach. If you're marinating anything, by all means, email us. The biggest thing we're really trying to collectively get is lessons learned and best practices across the board. So if you've had success doing something out of this going forward, we just want to know so we can reshare that and redistribute it. To say, if this is a particular case you're looking at, this is what worked for these people roughly. And we don't have to identify the individual person, just this is what worked for me and this is why it worked. And then hopefully on our website at torontogangprevention.ca, we'll be able to host them all up there and have thousands of them over the next couple of years to say, this is what works collectively, and people can go up there and check and say, this is what works, and then we can connect people to have contact points. While this is being led by the police, we are not looking for ownership of this. We can't solve this problem. We're the back end, we're the violent problem, we're the arrest people, build some inroads, be role models, but we're not the solution to this. The solution is 100% the community and the family. So that being said, thank you for your time. I appreciate everybody coming out. Thanks again, and we'll be here for a few minutes. You guys can chat with us. Thanks.